Let's get started, everybody. Welcome. Really good to see you all. If you don't know who we are, then very quickly, let's just introduce ourselves. So my name is Graham Alcott. I'm the founder of Think Productive and the author of a number of different books, including being the co-author of How to Fix Meetings.
I'm Hayley. I'm Graham's co-author for the only book I've written, How to Fix Meetings. I'm also part of the Productivity Ninja team at Think Productive, and I do some facilitation and coaching outside of that as well. So lots of meetings. We asked you, as people were joining, to share in the chat ideally in one word, how you might describe some of your difficulties with meetings. And I see the most recent word that's come in is hybrid. So we're definitely going to be talking about that and touching on that during our time together.
And then a few things that I think come up quite a lot. Obviously, too many, just spending too much time in meetings. Not quite knowing why you're there. So just the etiquette around people being invited in certain ways or being CC'd in certain ways. The whole thing which a couple of you have mentioned about lots of talk, but then when's the work actually going to happen? When are we going to do something about this? And often challenges around enabling people to pay attention, which I think is actually a really heightened thing. We'll talk about this a bit more, but just, around hybrid and Zoom meetings, people appearing like they're online, but actually they're multitasking in the background, putting their shopping away or whatever else it is. So yeah, lots of problems with meetings and lots that we can do about it. So we're just going to, in this session, just give you a few ideas from the book, a few updates of kind of things we've been thinking about since we wrote the book, and also then just Q&A. So lovely to get your inputs, get your questions, and yeah, looking forward to having that conversation with you. So there's a couple of questions on there already, which is great to see.
Yeah, so if you've got a particular question you're hoping to get answered in the session today, do head to the Q&A section to share that. One of the really interesting things I think about meetings is we all know that they have a cost, right? 5-6 years ago, when people were predominantly meeting together in a room, people talk about it's the cost of the room, it's the cost of the tea, it's the cost of the coffee. But what about the cost of all those people getting together and giving that discussion their time and attention? And if you think back to some of the meetings you've been to recently, and what they would have cost in terms of the number of people, the amount of time that they're spending in that meeting. If the person who had convened that meeting was given an invoice for that amount of time, would the output of that discussion, the outcomes, have been worth that in terms of their budget? So just looking to really be a bit ruthless about who we're inviting to meetings and how long we're taking them for.
And there's like the direct cost, and there's also the opportunity cost, isn't there, right? Which is what could people be doing in that time if they weren't sat in the meeting?
And in the chat there, so many people have mentioned like too many meetings and back-to-back meetings, and that kind of leaves the question, well, when's the work going to get done, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Which leads us on quite nicely to, let's just focus for a couple of minutes on a slightly bigger idea than just meetings, but meetings being part of that ecosystem of attention and all the different things that we could and should have our attention on as part of a working day. So those of you who've read How to Fix Meetings, you'll probably know that this diagram comes up 2 or 3 times in sort of different parts of the book. This is really just a way to think about our attention in meetings and then our attention outside of meetings. And the reason for this, and the reason this is important, is when we were writing the book, it felt like there were loads of books out there that would tell you how to have the perfect meeting. Here's how to chair really well, here's how to invite really well, all of that stuff. My favorite book, I guess, along that kind of track is Nancy Klein and her book Time to Think and the Thinking Environment. And then there's loads of books which will tell you how to get rid of meetings and burn it all, so probably Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week, very good example of that kind of book. Cal Newport's Deep Work. So those are really good. They're also really good principles to be thinking about. But actually, I feel like the answer lies in the balance between those two. So really our approach is about saying, let's get rid of loads of meetings and make space for what really matters, which is the few meetings that we're going to keep that really make the difference. So it's not just about saying, let's burn them all. It's not about saying, let's keep doing as many meetings as we're doing and do them all perfectly. But the answer lies somewhere in between, which is really where this balance of yin and yang comes through. So this is an ancient Chinese dualist symbol. And the idea is that on the one hand, you have yin, which is a very deep kind of energy. It's about reflection. If you think of yin as being about like the air and the water, and then yang is a much more direct energy. It's about the fire and the ground, you know, so the earth and the fire. So when you think about it in that way, what I need to do with my own attention and what as a manager I need to do and help enable for the people around me is that we need to spend a good amount of our time in that yang energy, the doing stuff, the deep work, the pushing things forward, the setting the dates. And we need to be outside of meetings to be able to do that. So we need to clear some space. And then when we have that space, what we need to put in the space is really deep listening and reflection and appreciation and ideating and all of those things that are, you know, a little bit more sensitive and they need a little bit more, you know, kind of bringing to the surface and nurturing. And what's really nice about this symbol is the seed of each is within the other. So that's what the dots are. So if you think about when you're in those meetings, you want them to be as empathetic as possible, as connected as possible. But you also want that seed of, when's this going to get done by? What's the date? You know, so you kind of need to have that sense of structure, even in the very middle of that meeting altogether in an empathetic way. And then also when you're in that kind of deliberate ignorance, deep work kind of state, deliberately shying away from meetings and plowing your own furrow, you kind of have to have half an ear on what's going on in the rest of the world. Are other people having meetings that really affects me? Is there other stuff I need to just be sensitive to? So you can't just, you know, when you're in that deep work, selective ignorance kind of phase, you can't be completely removed from the fact that the rest of the world's carrying on and there might be things that you need to tend to. So I just think that's a really nice way of saying, you know, in terms of our organizations, you know, we need to get this balance right between the yin and the yang, the meeting and that kind of deep appreciation, deep empathy kind of time, and the let's just go and get some stuff done. You know, let's get out of meetings and really do the stuff that makes a difference. And really it's how we get the balance between those two things that I think really kind of marks out our success when it comes to productivity here.
I mean, in terms of getting that balance, so many people I'm meeting at the moment are saying, oh, it's so nice to be back together in person. Other people are saying, isn't it great? We don't have to go into the office and we can meet online. Hybrid meetings got quite a few mentions in the chat earlier. So just because we can meet anywhere doesn't mean that we should. I'm sure people have all got kind of examples and thoughts on their own experiences of that. I don't know about you, Graham, but I'm getting asked a lot about, well, hybrid meetings, how do we make them work?
Yeah.
And I think my thoughts on that is, you know, if we can have one or the other, that's always the optimum, right? It's a much more equitable way for people to contribute. If we're doing it online, we can say, okay, we're all going to head to the chat and we're going to share our thoughts there, or we're going to use a Miro board or whatever it might be. If we're meeting in person, we get that kind of the buzz and the energy from the room, and we can see who might want to contribute in a way we can't online. So I think the ideal is always to do kind of one or the other. And it depends on the technology and the setup that you've had. I know I've been to organizations where I've arrived to deliver this session in person, and they said, oh, we've got a few people joining us on Zoom, and kind of explain why we're not advocating for that being a great idea. And on the couple of times where I tried it, like the sound quality hasn't been very good. They haven't had the right equipment to pick up what's being said, not just by me as a speaker, but by the other people contributing in the room. And those that are not joining online have had a less good experience. Graham, I know you've worked with an organisation who've had some really good tech around this. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, we were talking about this before, and you were saying how one of your clients has said, please don't advocate not to do hybrid meetings. We've just spent 90 grand on our kit. And it's like, well, of course, if you've got, I think it's always about friction, isn't it? And if you're going to, and we've all been in those meetings, I'm sure, where you're trying desperately to involve the one or two people that can't get physically to the meeting, and it's feeding back, and it's, you know, just creating loads of noise. And, you know, I was on one a little while ago where basically I couldn't really hear what was going on. the only bits I could hear was them faffing around trying to involve me. And after about 20 minutes, I just said to the chair, I was like, this is just costing more. And it's worth my input, being here. So just do it without me, So I think eliminating the friction is a really important thing with all of this. But there's definitely I also did an offsite with a management team a few weeks ago, and they hadn't met in person for since before COVID, so 3 years. And just the energy, I think sometimes the energy that you get from face to face is just so palpable, isn't it? And not to be sort of underestimated, particularly for people like me who, I work very solo, sat in my shed. I'm quite used to being quite isolated, but for a lot of people, that's just not the norm.
Absolutely. And Sarah's made an interesting comment there about, she shared some reasons why people might prefer online meetings. And we're not saying don't do online meetings. We're kind of saying, rather than having some people in the room, some people joining online, and people can't quite hear what other people are saying, the technology isn't set up for that. Maybe if that's the case, everybody needs to kind of go back to their own space and log on and do the meeting online so that everybody can take part in that way and contribute in the same way. That way everybody can hear what's being said, people can see the chat. So I think we're not saying we don't want to do online meetings. We're saying we want people to make a bit more of a conscious choice about, is this something to do online? Is this something to do in person? If you'd normally do it as a hybrid, we want to kind of challenge you to say, have you got the right technology, the right equipment to make that work? So that those that are logging in and joining online are having an equally good experience and an equally good opportunity to contribute as everybody else in the room.
For sure. Yeah, I kind of almost feel like hybrid is like the messy middle, right?
Yeah.
So you can do online meetings really well. You can also do in-person meetings really well. And hybrid can be done really well with the right tech and with some some really good consideration about it. It's one of those ones where as a speaker, if I'm doing a keynote, and especially when often what happens is the client at the last minute says, you're speaking at this conference. Oh, by the way, we've got another 500 people. They're all online over on this laptop over here. And you're like, well, I haven't set up how I'm going to do my talk or my slides or anything for that group, which is actually now bigger than the group that's in the room. So I just think it's a really important consideration is like for speakers, as well as meeting participants, it's like, where are you actually putting your attention? Like, where is the audience? Like, where's the space? And often hybrid is almost like, because you're trying to do two things, it's not clear where the space really is.
Yeah, and it needs a lot more thought, I think, and planning. And Dennis has made a point there in the chat about it takes time and investment to make that work. And I guess that's, really important to think about.
For sure. Should we do a few quick fire?
Yeah, some top tips, and then we can head into questions.
So this was yours, Hayley, this one.
Excellent. Okay. So we want to encourage people in the meetings that you're hosting, whether they're online, whether they're in person, some kind of way of checking in. We did that today with you, just to say, head to the chat, introduce yourself, share where you're joining us from, how you're feeling about meetings in one word. So we're encouraging people to contribute right from the outset. So when you're in a meeting and you're asking somebody to do that, one of the ones I'll be using in the session I'm delivering tomorrow is something that's going well in life or work. And just asking people, just keep it short, like something that's going well for you. And what that does is it allows everybody in the meeting to speak and say something quite early on. And they're saying something positive, so it's kind of setting the tone for the conversation as well. And what that means is that, within the first few minutes, everybody's spoken. Very often meetings are about identifying where there's maybe disagreement or people coming up with ideas, new approaches. So if somebody's going to say something, they feel it could be a little bit controversial. It's even more difficult to do that if you haven't already spoken. So by doing that introductory round, people get used to the idea of talking. Ideally, it should make sure that if people don't already know each other really well, that they do introductions so everybody knows who's who. If you've got somebody new joining the meeting for maybe the first, second or third time, like really important to just do names again, because they might not have remembered everybody. Less so online, of course, where you can see everybody's name on the screen. But sometimes we have people joining our workshops, it's a string of numbers or some initials or something that doesn't make sense. So just asking people in those online meetings to kind of update that to make sure that their name is being shared. If you've got a bigger group, you might do what we did today in the chat. I've also seen a few kind of pictorial examples. I quite like the squirrel check-in, where you've got 9 different squirrels doing different things. You can kind of tell by their body language what mood they might be in. So it's just kind of something that's quite light-hearted to get people engaged and starting off. But we want to do that at the end of the meeting as well. So maybe something you've valued or something that you're looking forward to. At Think Productive, in some of our internal meetings, we say, you know, even better if, what would have made the meeting even better. So encouraging everybody to have an opportunity to just kind of check out and say, okay, we're done with the meeting now, we're ready to move on.
Yeah, Nancy Klein talks about there's arriving and then there's arriving. So, you know, people arrive in the room, but then also getting into that mindset where you're really tuned in and listening to everybody else, where you've got your head around what the topic is and where you're warmed up to contribute. That's a different kind of arriving. And I think often an opening round is a really good way to speed that up and get everybody to a place where you're in the zone, you're ready to really have a detailed, interesting, creative conversation, rather than still being in your head and thinking about the other 20 things you haven't done and that last email and what your boss just said or whatever else. So yeah, there's arriving and then there's also arriving.
Yeah, and there's a lovely point being made in the chat about how do you tackle a group that's struggling to come to the space with positivity. So I will sometimes just explain why I'm doing that exercise, saying, you know, I want us to start on something positive. So we set that kind of positive intent for our time together. And occasionally somebody will say, I can't think of anything positive to say. I might say, okay, no worries. Some people feel a bit put on the spot and find that difficult. And I might say, look, you know, we'll come back to you at the end, give you a few more moments to think about it. Maybe even just give people a few, 30 seconds or so to say, right, this is what we're going to do. Give you all a moment to think of something. We've got a couple of hands raised, so let me we've got somebody there with a question that they want to come in with at this point. Joanne. Okay, maybe not.
Joanne was just stretching her arms.
Sorry, I might have put my hand up by accident. I don't think it was me. Apologies.
No worries.
No worries. No worries.
We will come back and we'll do Q&A in a few minutes. So bubble those questions away, and they're coming. One little rule we've got into at Think Productive, and we talk about this in the book, is the idea of no. So really good way to say no and push back to the meeting invites that just pop up in your Outlook and you're like, there's another hour of my day gone, what for, you know? So just, this is really about culture, getting a sort of cultural expectation that someone who's organizing the meeting really needs to be thinking about who should be there, what the purpose is, and so on and so forth. And the kind of ninja level version of this is not just no agenda, no attendance, but no purpose statement, no attendance. So just having a specific, you know, here is where we will be by the end of the meeting, kind of wording that isn't the agenda items, but just the intention and what we're trying to achieve.
And I've seen some lovely examples of that of clients we've worked with. One of our clients has, if they've got a meeting where they've got slides for their online stuff, the purpose statement is at the top or kind of down the side of all the slides. So it's there as a constant reminder, this is what we're here to do together today. And everybody can see that and kind of buy into that. I think that's lovely.
I don't know how you feel, Hayley, like whenever I've done facilitation with boards and sort of senior teams and stuff, and you get into those bits where there's some kind of sidetrack issue or there's some politics playing out and all that stuff. I always find that it's at that moment that I'm really sort of pleased with myself that I took the time to write a purpose statement for it, because being able to in that moment say, hey, we all agreed this was the purpose, let's go back here, and then, you know, and you can really like wrestle control back as the chair from those sort of competing sort of power struggles or diversions or whatever else is going on. I kind of feel like purpose statements as a chair really work in your favor when you do them well.
And there was another comment in the chat earlier on, which was about like we've come to the conclusion, but everybody wants to have their say. And that's another good time where you can go back to the purpose statement and say, okay, we think we're there now. So things don't overrun, or might even finish early. Like, wouldn't that be cool? Nice. So sometimes our meetings get a bit stale, you know, that team meeting you go to, or whatever other meeting it might be, but it happens every week or every month or every quarter. And they start to feel a bit dull, don't they? Because you're doing the kind of the same thing, you have the same kind of things repeating on the agenda. So where that's the case, we want to encourage you to get rid of that meeting for a while. Don't have it. Go back to the people involved and ask them, like, what are you missing? See what they develop an appetite for, and then replace it with something new. Because you might read the book, you were on the session today, you might decide on some things you're going to do to jazz up and liven up your meetings. Then in another 6 months' time, everybody's got used to that, and it feels a bit more day to day and how everybody already does things. So we need to kind of keep changing things up.
Feels important to keep stuff fresh, for sure. Moving around, so in Productivity Ninja, I talk a bit about the idea of changing the view. So particularly as you get tired in the afternoon, moving to just put your eyes on new things, moving to a different part of the office, just moving around can really kind of give you a bit of a boost. And it's also something I try and do if I'm in, you know, a sort of conference or an all-day meeting. It's just sit in different parts of the room in different parts of the day. And guess what? Like, just the way my memory works, that's how I remember which parts of the agenda have happened in different spaces is just by going back in my mind to, like, where was I sitting in the room when that was happening? And that's where it all kind of comes back to me.
I quite like to do some kind of get up, move, stretch, jump about breaks, particularly in virtual meetings, but in-person ones as well. Yeah, that where we sit makes a difference.
From goats to hippos. So the HIPPO is the highest paid person's opinion. So this is about recognizing that there will be some dynamics and sort of things happening in the room that are not said, and that particularly where you've got someone who has a very influential opinion, it will, if they're in the room, it will make it very difficult for often the important truths to get raised. So really important thing to know about, really important thing to just be aware of. And Hayley, what are your thoughts on hippos? Have you found anything has worked particularly well when you're talking to groups about this idea of
I think whenever
paid person's opinion?
Whenever I talk to groups about the hippos, everybody knows who that person in the room is, right? Everybody turns around and kind of looks at them. So we, generally speaking, we all know who this is. So, you know, if you are the hippo, try and go last. If you're chairing the meeting, try and go to the hippo last. Maybe even have that conversation with them beforehand and say, look, let's get everybody else's ideas, explain this hippo thing, and encourage them to come up with their ideas once they've heard everyone else's.
Yeah. I was chairing a thing a few weeks ago. The CEO was in the room, and the conversation was about culture, HR, policies, practices, that kind of topic. And it was quite clear that there was a lot of people making, you know, eyes and daggers at the CEO, but, you know, saying, we kind of want to hear what you think about this stuff. But also there was things that were not being said. And things that I kind of knew people were biting their tongue about. So what I decided to do was just address it really head on. And so I actually said to that person, I said, hey, are you making notes here? Because it feels like people have some stuff to say, and like they want you to write this down and take it away, and do something different about it. And everyone was like, oh, thank you. And often it's kind of easier for me or Hayley as facilitators in those moments to do that, because we're the outsiders, we're the corporate outlaws, right? So like we don't have to be really popular with that CEO the following week, right? Like we just send the invoice and make sure it still gets paid. But like other than that, so I think there's a use there, but I think there's something really important about just like calling that stuff out.
Yeah, being
really open to it. And as it was, I think the CEO in question was actually really grateful to me for doing that, and was like, yeah, we do, like, he knew that he needed to be held to account over certain things, and you know, changes needed to happen. So it was useful, but it was just that moment where it's like, I didn't actually use the phrase HIPPO or even talk about it in that way, but I use this little phrase like, are you making notes? People want you to take this away. And
yeah, it's important stuff.
like, yeah, cool. And so it's just kind of recognizing that dynamic. And for me, sometimes it's like taking it from being something that's an undercurrent to just slamming it on the table and saying, here, elephant in the room.
Yeah, let's make it explicit. This is what we're talking about. Absolutely.
Do you want to talk very quickly about the 40-20-40 one? I think this is just like one of my favorite just kind of overview principles about meetings culture, isn't it?
And it comes from a book called Meeting Together. And Graham and I really liked this this principle. The idea being that 40% of the effort goes into the planning and the stuff you do before the meeting, 20% of the effort during the meeting, and obviously you give the actual meeting itself 100% of your attention and your effort, but in terms of the spectrum of these different parts of the meeting process. And then 40% on the follow through afterwards. Like if you're meeting, you need to be deciding, making decisions. We want something to change, something to happen that wouldn't otherwise have happened. And that's the key thing. I think before I was introduced to this model, back when I was a client of Think Productives and I did some meetings training, I probably put 5, maybe 10% effort tops in beforehand. Like 80-90% of it, the meeting was the thing. That's the bit that had all the energy, and a little bit on the follow-up and actions that was specific to me afterwards. Putting that 40% of the effort in before, that follow-through kind of comes fairly naturally if you can do that. I think it does make a huge difference. And a couple of people have shared some comments earlier on in the chat about the importance of preparation and what that looks like. And there's loads of resources on the Productivity Ninja Academy and places where you can access kind of checklists and all that kind of good stuff.
Yes, and Katie there is saying then it follows a maximum 20% of your time should be meetings. Yes. So when you're in back-to-back meetings Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, then your week's already done, right? I think the other thing about it is if you get into the habit of the assumption is that you're turning up and you're prepared and also everybody else is prepared, then the 20% is easier because everyone is trusting the process of the meeting runs better, and because they know there's going to be follow through, they don't spend as long talking about stuff in the meeting. It's like, yeah, cool, we know follow through is happening, people trust that, and so they don't need to keep hammering home the same points over and over again during the meeting. So once you think about it in that way, it does create the kind of cultural imperative in organizations to cut down the number of meetings, but also it does what we were saying before with the yin and yang. Like once you clear that space, then you can actually focus much more on the meetings that do really matter. So really important. And then truth amnesty. So kind of what we were saying a few minutes ago with the HIPPO effect is just kind of making that stuff that feels a bit, it's below the table, putting it on the table a bit more. And same when kind of things go stale or there's like a big elephant in the room kind of truth. It's, sometimes I think meetings end up being very long dances to avoid truth. And really like the art of good meeting participation or good meeting chairing is about trying to hook on to truths and really dissect them and take them apart.
Absolutely. And I think people in the team know what the truth is, right? The people in the team know what the issues are. They know what needs to be fixed. So putting some trust in people to kind of come up with that. I know in a lot of the kind of the away days and team sessions that I facilitate, you ask people, what's the thing that you want to smash up? What's the thing you want to get rid of? And I usually ask them to write that down so that people aren't having to say it out loud. Then we collect them all up on the wall. And there aren't many things where just one person's written something. Usually the same thing has been written by a number of different people, and everybody's like, oh, I thought it was just me that complained about that. So using that as an opportunity to kind of really get things out there.
I did a blog post a little while ago called Silently Screaming, and I was kind of saying so many times everyone's kind of suffering in silence with this thing that everybody knows needs fixing, but like no one's actually brave enough to just put it above the line. But when you do, lots of other people will go, thank you, we can make
people are grateful that it's out there. I think it was a blog post I did on LinkedIn a few weeks ago, and so once that thing's out there, how do people feel? And almost everybody responded. So yeah, that sense of relief, that sense of, oh, good, it's out there now we can talk about it.
Couple more bits and then we need to do
Yeah.
so let's crack on. I liked what Dennis is putting in the chat there about using the car park space, or just an ideas park, just putting stuff over there for people to come back to. A few tips there for virtual meetings. Yeah, obviously lots of useful stuff to think about, and I'm sure there's stuff there that you guys are very aware of and familiar with. And just a good reminder that ultimately meetings, just like when we talk about email, we often say that email is just the medium, and when we talk about inbox zero, meetings are just a medium too, but what really matters through that medium is the next physical actions. Where do we want to get to? And what's the thing that if I was a fly on the wall in my office and I was making a start, what would I see myself doing? So what's that next physical action? So making sure we're leaving meetings with the next physical action at the very bare minimum will just help those meetings to become a lot more productive. Speaking of which, we'd love you to share some thoughts in the chat if you'd like to. Just anything you've heard that you think, hey, there's a thing that I'm just going to take and think about and implement, or just do a bit differently in my own organization, just as a result of what you've just heard. So anything that you're resolving to do from today, we'd love you to just put that in the chat. And while you're doing that, I'd also invite you, one of the things that we have in the book, which we're really proud of, not to be the hippo, Sarah, I love that. One of the things that we're really proud of is this thing that we do in some of our Think Productive workshops called the Delete a Day Challenge. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you had an extra day in your week to be able to do the work that really mattered? So a day, we're going to take us 7 hours. So let's think about, how do we get 7 hours back? So actually, if you start looking through the meetings where you've got 4 people in a room for an hour, that's 4 hours, and so if you delete that one meeting and just solve that issue by sending an email for 20 minutes, you've deleted 4 hours. Likewise, if you've got a full day meeting with 10 people, just think how many hours that is. So just in terms of thinking about this, getting the balance right between the yin and the yang, and like having enough time and attention left to do the real work. The Delete a Day Challenge is one that we invite you to have a go at. And the idea is, can you just find 7 hours that you can take out of your calendar and everybody else's? So that might be you saying no to a meeting where you're going to be there for an hour and you just delete one. You've got 5 people in a meeting that's half an hour long, that's 2.5 hours. So just kind of thinking about the currency of time and attention in that way, and just creating some scarcity around it, I think, is a really useful thing.
And let us know how you get on. Like, share that on LinkedIn, or get in touch with us directly. We'd love to know how you get on with that challenge.
Yes, tag us in on LinkedIn, and when you've deleted a day. I get loads of emails from people saying, I've just read your book and I've got my inbox to 0. It's like, yeah, and you just got mine to not 0. Just before we finish, just to say that if you didn't know, Think Productive has a whole range of workshops around productivity, around leadership and management that can really help your organization, help your team. That's just some of the things that we do right there. Also, we're sort of licensed partners of Gretchen Rubin's work on the 4 tendencies. We do stuff around influencing and persuading, and just a whole lot more. So if you're interested in bringing us in to help your team, then you can just head to thinkproductive.co.uk. Hayley, do you want to talk about Grace's thing?
Yeah, Grace's thing is on the 11th of May, and Grace will be doing an online version of our one-day workshop, which is called How to Be a Productivity Ninja. This is for anybody who's got like too much work to do and not enough time to do it in. So pretty much everybody. And we take you through thinking about how to prioritize, how to make those things that seem like insurmountable big tasks like really easy to get stuck into and move on to the next thing. So there's lots of group conversation, lots of opportunity for you to start implementing and building what we call a second brain. And that's going to help you just have clarity that what you're working on at any point in time is the right thing to be giving your energy and your attention to. I shall just share a link in the chat in a moment with the details.
Thanks, because for some reason my notes won't let me pull it out. So there you go. It's in my notes, but I can't get it. Just while Hayley's doing that, just to say, if you're not signed up to my email newsletter, Rev Up for the Week, then please do. It's at grahamallcott.com. Just fill in that little form. And it's just one positive or productive idea for the week ahead, sent every Sunday at 4:05 p.m. UK time. So sign up to that at grahamallcott.com. And we're going to just go to some Q&A. So
yeah.
Let's pull up the question box here. Dennis is asking, what are the top CEOs issues that you're hearing at the moment? So I've done a couple of things recently with a couple of CEOs and also with leadership teams. And I would say the two things that are coming up a lot, one is like just economic. I think there's a lot more economic uncertainty in boardrooms than on the news, if that makes sense. And the other one is AI. I just think everybody is talking about AI, ChatGPT. What does this mean? I actually think it's being underplayed how much of a big revolution this is. And I think people got excited about making haikus out of ChatGPT. And it's sort of a distraction from the fact that it could actually either revolutionize the world or wreck the whole world. So I just think it's huge. So that's definitely what I'm hearing a lot of people talking about. Hayley, have you got any other bits to add to that?
I mean, I'm still hearing a lot of people talking about, like, what's that balance like in terms of hybrid working? Do we get our people to come in? Are we happy with them working at home all the time? Like, what's the middle ground? So I'm hearing a lot more talk about that, just very practical, operational issue, I guess.
Oh, Emma, could you put some links to those in the chat? We'd love to geek out on some AI apps for recording minutes and actions. That sounds cool. Our CEO is leading a change of taking meetings out of the calendar and using Teams. I think that means using Teams as in like Microsoft Teams to avoid meetings.
So. Yeah.
What do you think, Hayley?
I think one of the really important things about this improving meetings, behaviors and culture change is leading by example. If CEOs are getting a bit more ruthless about the meetings that they attend, that helps to give everybody else permission to do that. If the CEOs are making sure that things start and finish on time, again, that kind of gives other people a bit more confidence that that's how that they can operate as well. And I think the thing about using Teams and meetings is we just need to think a bit more carefully about, is this a conversation we can just have over Teams, or is it something where I want to meet with somebody to get some kind of real-time answers? I see so many organizations where people will say, oh, well, I send an email, and then if I don't get a response to my email, I'll probably send a Teams message. And if I don't get a response to that, I might then send a WhatsApp message. And if I don't get a response to that, I'll give them a call. And this has all happened within like the space of an hour sometimes.
Yeah.
We haven't got much clarity in a lot of workplaces around what tools are the best way to communicate what information. So I think there's a lot more conversations to be had around that. What do you think, Graham?
I guess a similar thing. I was just thinking about this other question about meetings overrunning. Rather than repeating your answer on that one, I'll move on and do this other question. So our meetings always overrun, sometimes by an hour. How can I influence keeping meetings to time when I don't have any authority on the meeting, i.e. you're not the chair, it's led by people much more senior than you? I think probably the obvious, so no one's going to have much sort of credibility in that situation by just saying, hey, it was supposed to finish at 2, it's 2:10, I'm leaving. But I think if instead of that, you can say, hey, I had planned something to start at 2:15 or something, and this is, so almost like, in a way, the tactic here is noticing where those sort of repeat offenders are, and then booking something very close to the end of that meeting. So you're using that assumption of like, this is the end. And I think, we just have to kind of act in that slightly disingenuous way culturally sometimes. The other one is like, when people I've worked with a few people that will book time into their calendar for just like thinking time or deep work time, and then it just gets kind of booked over the top of. Whereas if you change that from just being like doing my deep work time or thinking time, and change that to like Project Magenta, or just something that has like a funny name and just feels like it's busy. Busy people respond to busy, and they respect busy more than they respect space. It's coming back to the yin and the yang thing again. So I think that for me is probably the best tactic I can think of, is having something that feels tangible to whoever that chair is, that gets you out of it pretty much close to the designated endpoint, so that you're not kind of sat there for hours and hours. Katie sharing, you can also offer to time keep for them. Yes, I think you have to be careful that that's not a patronizing thing. But yeah, in certain situations, that's a really good idea. Hayley, what do you think?
I think this is a really tricky one where you're not part of the senior team. I think there's an advantage here almost if you're new. If you're coming into an organisation, and there was a question about that further down. You're coming into an organisation and you're new. You're saying, I've kind of noticed that meetings don't start on time and they finish a bit late. Just wondering, is that causing a problem for people? I don't mean in the meeting. This is a conversation to have with somebody that has maybe a bit more influence. Saying, do you think there's something we can do about this? How about we start here? It's that elephant in the room, isn't it? It's putting that thing on the table and looking to see if there are any opportunities to start that conversation. But it needs to be done with good intent. It needs to be done in a, let's see if we can make this better. I imagine it's causing these problems for people. So I think not during the meeting, but outside of the meeting, where might you have a bit of influence? Where might you be able to ask some questions? I would imagine it's a problem for everybody in this kind of scenario. And I'm sure that most people would appreciate that being tackled, but it's how do you get it out there and start talking about it? You might leave a copy of the book on the person's desk.
Absolutely. Couple of nice questions here. Someone anonymous saying, how do you agree the purpose statement? And that's just moved. Where's it gone? Who gets the final say? So how do you agree the purpose statement? Who gets the final say? I think there's kind of two answers to this. One is if you are very much the chair and the leader of the meeting, I would say it's down to you to write it, and then you check that. So the check could just be at the start of the meeting. Hey, I've written this as the purpose statement. Do we all agree? Let's go. And it could be as simple as that. With a slightly more collaborative team meetings, if I think about Think Productive's internal team meetings, away days, town halls, that kind of thing, generally that will be something that we're thinking about at the end of the last one. There'll be a kind of top line conversation about it, and then there'll be a Slack conversation about it, and then it will kind of continue to evolve as we get closer to the time. But it feels really important to me that everybody's having some input into, is this the right purpose? Is this the right stuff? Because it's a collaborative effort. So it's more about having the right structures in place to be able to do that, I think, than it is who. But if it's a smaller meeting, yeah, probably just the chair. Any thoughts on that, Hayley?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I would say.
And then let's do one more, and then we're gonna we'll wrap up, and then we will also, in fact, it's 2:45 right now. Let's do the formal wrap up. We will stick around for what we call after dark. So if your question hasn't been answered and you can hang around for the next 15 minutes, we will answer it. But yeah, if you have to head off right now, a couple of links just being shared in the chat there. So do connect with us. Really encourage you to check out what Think Productive is doing. Bring us in to help us with your team. But thanks for being part of this. Thanks for spending some time with us here on a certainly where I am, very grey afternoon. And yeah, look forward to seeing you all again soon. So shall we stop the record at that point, Hayley, and then we'll do a bit of after dark?
Absolutely. And if
you're not after dark transition moment.
If you're not able to hang around for the after dark, I've made a copy of those questions and we'll do some blog posts about those and pop them on LinkedIn.
Cool. So welcome to After Dark, if you're sticking around. How do you get out of meetings that you're invited to?
Great question.
I feel like you're pretty good at this, actually, Hayley. I feel like you're good. you're good at very deftly. Is that a word? Deftly or deftly? Deftly is the word, is it? You know, like asking those questions or pushing back or asking for the purpose statement, and when I've been too lazy to write one, things like that.
Yeah, I think very often one of the things that comes up for me in this workshop time and time again when we do the kind of the 3-hour version is that sense of, well, I go to meetings that aren't well chaired, you know, what am I supposed to do about that? And it's like, if you're turning up, you're one of the participants and you have a role to play in helping to achieve that purpose statement. And that starts in the prep, right? That starts beforehand. So going to somebody and saying, okay, yeah, I can see the purpose statement for this meeting if they're sent one out. But why do you need me? What is it that I can bring? What are you expecting me to do? I need to understand so I can prepare well for this meeting, I think is a great question. And that might lead to somebody saying, well, actually, I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
Or sharing something with you that you're like, well, I'm not the best person to do that. You need Graham for that, or whoever else it might be. So I think asking some questions is a good way. I know certainly when I used to go to meetings where I was required to go to a meeting, say once a month or once every 2 or 3 weeks, and most of those meetings weren't particularly productive or helpful, but it was important in the work I was doing at the time to be around the table and to be involved in some of those conversations. So I used to go to some of them, but not all of them, probably 1 in 3. Or there's the guest appearance.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of it can often be it can come across too aggressive to just say, no, I'm not doing this meeting.
Yeah.
So I think there's lots of ways of being aggressive without being aggressive. So that thing you just mentioned there about the guest appearance thing. So if it's an all-day meeting or it's a 3-hour meeting, you know, and you can see that the bit that you really add value to is in the last hour, just saying, hey, I can come for the last hour. Is that okay? But I'm looking at the agenda. That looks like, and most people will appreciate that you've spent the thought on that and won't actually ask what you're doing for the other 2 hours. So that's a good way of sort of getting around that sometimes. And I think there's lots of ways of just attending it once every couple of times, or and even like, I mean, we have a situation actually with one of our colleagues where it's like, it's really useful for her to sort of have her toe in, but it's just too much time for her to be in our meeting every week. So she's just there, I think every 2 or every 3. I can't even remember, but it's like, you know, we've explicitly agreed that months ago, and it's kind of in the outlook. And so just finding those ways of doing fractions or having half a toe in rather than being totally out, I think is quite a good way of thinking of it too.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a lovely question. What phrases could you use to convince a team or group to bring their truth? I could use these. I'd say, I'd love to know your phrases, Hayley. I'd say there's something important before phrases though, isn't there? Which is like the psychological safety of the room.
Yeah.
And the group in that moment needs to be set.
Yeah.
Otherwise the phrases don't matter. But yeah, what are your thoughts on them?
I mean, I always try and do this in a way where people can contribute anonymously. So writing it down, I guess I'm usually there with people either in a room or in a Zoom room for the purpose of getting together for a period of time as a group, as a team. So if I will usually let them know that that's coming, you know, whether that's before we do the exercise or before a break, so we're going to be doing this later, have a think. I would just say to people, you know, what in as few words as possible, but you're not allowed to use somebody's name, right? Because that's just rude. What do you think we should get rid of, or what needs changing? What's not working for you? I might say to people, you know, what's blocking things? What's getting in the way for you? And people kind of understand what that is. If you're working with a team of people over a long period of time, if you do this fairly regularly, people, you know, might start with the small stuff and build up to some of the bigger things once they've got that sense of, hey, I raised this and nobody shot me down and it was okay. And actually we did something about it. That allows people to start building that sense of psychological safety. And leading by example, you know, can I say, you know, this is my thing, or you know, maybe even we're going to take a little break in the meeting now, and I want you to put your stuff up on the Miro board or the post-it notes on the wall, and just doing that in a really low-key kind of way to make it feel safe and give people the time and the space to think about it. I get excited.
I'm loving Donna's thing in the chat. It says, in my organization, hybrid meetings always start 5 to 10 minutes late, and it still takes us by surprise every time, which is our mistake. Yeah, it's so true. It comes back to the hybrid thing as well, right? Because
Yes.
that's about friction, isn't it? And it's like, if it's just more difficult to bring everybody together in one space, then it just takes time. Like it just does.
Yeah. And there was a comment further earlier on in the chat with somebody kind of saying, well, we've got somebody who wants to do everything in person, but people want to do it online.
Yeah.
To convince this person to move to kind of doing things online. So I say encourage them to experiment, give it a try. Like, let's try the next 4 meetings, or for the next month, let's just try it and see how we get on, because that gives you enough time to iron out any teething kind of problems. But you're not asking them to change it forever. You know, saying let's try it this way for this period of time, and then we'll have a chat about it.
Yeah, Tim Ferriss talks about the idea of the puppy dog close.
Yes, love that
sales technique, the puppy dog close, which is basically when you've got the child there is desperate to take the puppy home, the parents have a bit of a sort of trepidation thing going on. So the pet owner or the dog breeder says, do you want to just take it home for the weekend and just see how you go with it, and guess how many puppies ever get taken back? So it's just that way of saying, let's just try some. People get threatened by the idea of permanent change, but the idea of, can we just do a trial? Can we just see, just as a one-off, just as an experiment? People are kind of a bit more open to that way of thinking.
Definitely.
It feels like this next anonymous question, somebody has a very particular person in mind when they're asking this question. The HIPPO response at the end of every meeting is to go away and set up another meeting or make another plan. How can we push through more action-focused meetings? So it feels like there's a particular frustration with a particular person there.
Yeah.
What do you think? But I've got a couple of thoughts about it. Have you got anything?
Yeah, I think the way our brains work, it doesn't matter if you're highly introverted or highly extroverted. Once you've had that conversation with other people, you go away, you think about it, you sleep on it, your ideas kind of change and develop. So maybe this person is a particularly reflective kind of thinker. They want to have the conversation and then go away, make another plan, and it might feel like things aren't moving forward. So maybe there's something there about putting that out there, maybe having a shorter meeting to discuss some of those things, share those ideas, and then maybe meeting a couple of days later, or say, but this is where we decide on the actions. So you maybe separate those two things out. What are your thoughts, Graham?
Yeah, having a sort of almost like before you even start agreeing the actions, is like having that thing set up as like the follow through. We're going to check back in, is at this time and is on this day, so that there's almost like the next deadline is in there. My other thought to this though was, so it's being phrased there as like, well, the HIPPO just tells us to do this. I would say, yes, they have an influential opinion, which is what makes them the HIPPO, but everybody is also complicit in that. It's not just about the HIPPO. So I would say that the bigger thing is to take the lead and find other people that are equally as frustrated. There will be lots of other people who are frustrated if that's what's happening, and almost get them together in a bit of a huddle to say, right, we're going to change this, we're going to make this more action oriented. And almost like, that feels to me one of those instances where that role modeling to the HIPPO could actually work if it's a sort of collective thing, because surely the HIPPO also wants to see action and stuff happening and follow through. They might be sort of procrastinating in some sense, but actually like they might be really inspired by what comes from it. So I would say, yes, the highest paid person's opinion carries weight, but you're all equal participants in every meeting, and you all have a shared responsibility to make something happen. So like don't sort of scapegoat it to like, well, just because that person does it a certain way, we can't change it. I think we can always change it. Yeah.
There's another question there from Andrew about meeting times. Meetings have always been at that time, but they're in your time of proactive attention. And this is a tricky one, because for some people, they might want to use their proactive attention with meetings because they find them really quite difficult, quite draining. Other people, myself, for example, I'd rather do something else in my proactive time, like writing and adding up things that I struggle with. So I think that's a conversation for me. That's a kind of, other people might not know what that proactive attention time is. So kind of having a conversation about that, finding out what different people's proactive attention time is and saying, okay, how do we use this in terms of how we schedule meetings? Because then you're all kind of coming from the same place.
Yeah, and I think also that's about trying to have, you know, so there's a whole bit in How to Be a Productivity Ninja about when you have your best attention in every day and like what time of day is that and so on. And it does vary and differ for different people. But that's just not a conversation that I think most teams are having.
Oh,
so
they should.
Yeah, but they should. So I think you know, if you're kind of working in that way, the first conversation to have is, hey, this has really helped me. Here's the book. Here's the idea. Like, apply some of this stuff. And then I think you can lead that on into a sort of kind of wider conversations. It's not actually about that meeting. It's just more widely about how do we make sure we're using our best attention as much as we can. And the guy from 37 Signals, Jason Fried, big software company, he says his view of leadership for him is about getting out of the way to let people do their best work. And so you almost need a bit of a conversation about how do we get out of each other's way to allow that autonomy and deep work and the sort of yang energy to happen. And once you've at least got some awareness of that, it's kind of easier to then say, hey, can we maybe just can we rotate the timings of this? Can we just move it as a one-off experiment? Can we just change it?
Yeah, I like the rotation idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have a very set and specific and quite heavy-handed personal policy around this, which is like every morning in my Outlook calendar, Monday to Thursday, because that's the days I work, 9 until 1, it just says create time, do not book over. And I am like fairly militant about that. I will make exceptions, but I try not to make too many. And I know when those exceptions become, you know, you make an exception and it becomes like the thin end of the wedge and suddenly there's loads of them happening. But like, I'm aware that that's a level of autonomy that most people don't have. I know that. I'm not suggesting that everybody else should do that. But I just think that idea of, even if what you're claiming back for yourself is just an hour a day, or, you know, half an hour a week, whatever that might look like, but just having something in your calendar that says, you know, this is the time when I don't want to be in meetings. And so you're kind of you're upping the ante a little bit so that people do actually have to book over that and do actually have to be conscious of that. I think that's a really important sort of starting point as well for a lot of this stuff.
Cool, thanks.
We've got one more. I feel like there's two more on the.
Yeah, we've got 2 more. Both really good questions. So Dennis is asking about an event I attended recently, which was a conference for executive assistants and PAs. And we did a similar session to this around meetings and meetings culture. And I've delivered this course, a full-length course, a few times, specifically for this audience, because senior people are going, oh, I've got too many meetings. But the meetings are often put in by their PA or their EA, who's kind of a bit of a gatekeeper for their time. So those people are kind of being encouraged, you know, to push back a little bit. Well, what's the purpose? Why do you need this person there? How do we make sure those meetings finish on time? And a lot of that is about having shorter meetings, right? So that things aren't back to back, giving people time in between. So I think what we've talked about today isn't any different to the stuff that came up at the conference. I think this is a challenge for so many people in different roles in different organizations.
Yeah, and then that last one, how do you approach being able to move around during meetings when there is an expectation that you're sat down? So who set that expectation? I think, you know, obviously some of the advice in the book is more aimed at the people who have control and influence over meetings, who are the chairs of meetings, who are the managers organizing meetings. And so think it's about just kind of setting up the right kind of space. But also when it's remote working, how would I do that? I'd turn the camera off for 5 minutes and be right back. You know, everyone thinks you've gone to the loo, but actually you're doing star jumps or whatever else. Doing your plank on the floor. Can I just say, those of you who are still here, so there's 27 people still here. There's loads of really nice stuff in the chat as well. So we will take that stuff away. But if anyone, before we log off, wants to just cut and paste the chat, some lovely AI apps in there. There's good suggestion there about using Mentimeter for anonymous stuff. There's obviously all the links in there, so feel free to cut and paste the chat before we log off. And I've got to go, Hayley. I've got to go and I'm supposed to be in the house 2 minutes ago.
Okay, cool.
Waiting for someone, so I need to go and do that. Thank you all for sticking around for After Dark. Really lovely to see you all, and yeah, would love to see some of you on Grace's Productivity Ninja session on Thursday. Give us a shout about Think Productive sessions, and connect with us both on LinkedIn and elsewhere.
Yeah, if your question didn't get answered, because I'm just seeing loads of questions in the chat, so do feel free to connect with me or Graham on LinkedIn and share those questions with us there, and we'll post some answers. Thanks,
cool.
everybody.
And I'll keep surviving the COVID. Cheers, everybody.
Bye bye.